Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football and NFL landscapes that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. So we've had our fun with ranking head coaches, both in college football and the NFL, ranking some of those unheralded transfer portal players. Now we don't necessarily rank anymore. We want to move to a new mini series in a sense where I pick one player from each team in the NFL that I've got my eyes on to be a breakout player in the upcoming season. So before you watch the video or listen to the podcast, if you've got a prediction as to who your team might be or who the player will be representing your team, feel free to leave that on my Twitter, in the comments on the YouTube, any of that good stuff. But today we will be doing the AFC and NFC North, and then the next episode will be the AFC and NFC South, then East, then West. It's pretty cut and dry. You'll get used to the formula, but it's realistically my top 32 names to watch coming into this year that maybe didn't get their real breakout year yet. Most of them have not. And the real trick to this, and one of the things that I've made sure of, is that they're all under 3 years in the NFL. You don't want any guys older than that. I'm looking at those young guys that are still trying to get their feet under them from college, and I didn't want them to be a top 7 producer in the league last year, as far as stats go and where you would typically see them among positional rankings. So without further ado, we go to the Cincinnati Bengals. Picking for the Bengals was really interesting because I feel like a lot of their players that are young have already kind of broken out when you look at Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Joe Burrow. But there is one guy who you didn't get to see last year that I do have some pretty high hopes for. That's Joseph Ossai, formerly of Texas, now with the Bengals. And last year you didn't see him on the field because he had a meniscus injury. It took away his entire rookie season. Depth is the name of the game for edge rushers. Ossai should be able to provide that behind Hendrickson and Hubbard, two very talented edge rushers. Don't get me wrong, but I think realistically you're looking for an additional layer. It's hard to trust just two guys coming off the edge because what if one of them gets hurt? What if one of them is tired and doesn't want or shouldn't necessarily be in for one of those plays down the stretch where you need some presence? Having those extra rotations in there really help, and I think that's what Joseph Ossai, at least for his first year, is really going to be good at. Ossai, so long as he comes back from that injury well and doesn't show too many setbacks from it, I think he could be a really key part of the defense that maybe still goes unheralded next year because he's not a consistent starter, but he still brings the heat, and I think that his addition shows a lot of how much the Bengals trust him because Zach Taylor didn't really go out and bolster that position. They like what they have in Ossai, and hopefully it works out for them. Next, we go to the Cleveland Browns. We stay on the defensive side. The name I've chosen to single out is Greg Newsome. I was at a bit of a crossroads with the Browns. I was between Greg Newsome and Donovan Peoples-Jones, but I opted to go with Newsome because we don't know what's going to happen with Watson, at least officially. I know there are rumors that he might be out for the entire season, but as of the time I'm recording this episode, we don't know yet. And last year, Greg Newsome had a pretty good rookie campaign, 68.1 PFF grade, so there was enough to like, and a lot of what you saw on tape, he's not a ball hawk by any means. He had 0 interceptions last year, and I don't think he'll ever clear past the 3 or 4 mark if he gets to that point. But he gets in there and he breaks up the pass. He's not worried about intercepting the ball. He wants to stop a play as opposed to potentially slipping up on something and inadvertently letting the receiver get the ball and make a big play just because he was trying to find that highlight. That's not the type of player that Greg Newsome has appeared to be in his first year with the Cleveland Browns. Another thing that I'm really enjoying about this is a lot of what you base a cornerback's play on is really about the pieces around him, because if you have one really good corner and not many good pieces outside of it, more often than not, the corner is going to look worse because he doesn't have that extra help that he can trust, but that's not going to be a problem for Greg Newsome. He has plenty of good players around him when you think about Denzel Ward rather. You have John Johnson in the safety position. You'll have Grant Delpit out there. They've got another corner they just drafted, I believe Marcus Emerson. They've got talent all around him, and with the way that Cleveland is trending, especially when you get Deshaun back, I don't know that you love the Browns with Jacoby Brissett or Baker Mayfield not putting my eggs in that basket, but we'll just say Jacoby Brissett for the time being. I don't necessarily love them. I think they could still probably be an 8-win team, maybe a 9-win, crack that 500 mark, but I don't think that's enough to get it done in the AFC North. But as a collective unit, they're trending on the up and up. They look like a better squad, and I think Greg Newsome could help a lot with minimizing what they allow on defense and really helping the defense from staying on the field too long. They'll be able to get the offense back on there pretty quick. So that is the Browns selection. And again, I think you could go either way with him or Donovan Peoples-Jones. I just don't trust it with the quarterback that's going to be under center next year, potentially. Next, we move to the Baltimore Ravens, who I'm interested in this one because with Hollywood Brown leaving, that leaves over 1,000 yards to be accounted for, likely more if he would have played all of the year. But you've got to find somebody that can replace that value or at least take a big chunk of it. I've got Devin Duvernay for this role, and that's because Rashad Bateman feels like too much of a layup. I think he will be pretty solid. Devin Duvernay is overlooked at this point, and I think that he could really end up being the bigger beneficiary from this, primarily because he projects to slot in to the slot receiver role and play that undersized position that we've seen Lamar Jackson likes to use with Hollywood Brown. And one of his big highlights so far in his NFL career has been his ability to return kicks. And you can just tell on the tape with that how elusive he is, how quick he is to move, how fluid his hips are. And if you translate that directly into the passing game, it's going to be hard to keep him at a minimum. I think he should eclipse the 200-yard mark that he's hit so far. I believe he's hit just over 200 twice in his 2-year NFL career. I think he probably doubles that up at the bare minimum. And that's even in an offense where you hear a lot of trash talk about Lamar that he can't throw. He can throw. Maybe he's not as accurate as you really want. And last year isn't the best indicator because he was injured and the stats aren't all that pretty. But Devin Duvernay could help get Lamar back comfortable as a passer and help open up another lane in that offense that with Hollywood Brown missing, you're primarily looking at Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman, maybe one of your rookie tight ends. I know they got a couple of them this year. And outside of that, I mean, James Proche, you've got a couple depth receivers, but I think Devin Duvernay really becomes a standout in this offense because of the window that'll be opening up. So that's 3/4 of the AFC North now. We move to the final team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they're not all that young of a team, or I feel like a lot of their guys have either broken out in the form of Deontay Johnson. Chase Claypool was a big name receiver for a little bit there. But another option that could help the quarterback that goes under center for the next year is tight end. We know how reliable the tight end position can be for quarterbacks when they're not necessarily comfortable with a scheme yet, or they just kind of tend to that. And I think Pat Freiermuth has the makings to become a quarterback's dream, whether it's Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky. We don't know yet. And Pittsburgh, at least whenever I think of them, I think of quality tight end play. They definitely produce seasons that are better than what you would expect from the talent they have in there. Ebron and Vance McDonald stand out to me. And then Heath Miller, not too long ago, was a pretty solid tight end in the NFL. So I don't see much going wrong with Pat Freiermuth strictly because even if he's not the best receiver next year, he has the blocking skills that is going to make him useful no matter what happens. And being what is a safety blanket for all intents and purposes is what Pittsburgh needs right now because whoever their quarterback is going to be, more likely than not, is not the most comfortable guy under center yet, whether it be because they're coming from a different offense that they're now having to learn a new scheme. Well, I guess both these guys are, but one's more experienced and had some bad issues in Chicago with Mitch Trubisky, or you've got a rookie who is trying to find his footing in the NFL. We all think he's pro ready, but you don't really know until you put the pads on. So having a sturdy, reliable tight end who can get you, 10, 11, 12 yards on a play is going to be vital. And I think he really helps ease into that transition as they're developing more chemistry down the stretch. So that's the AFC North. We now transition to the NFC North with the Chicago Bears, a team I just mentioned because of Mitch Trubisky, and they're in similar waters now because they're trying to get a quarterback to work themselves out with Justin Fields, and I feel like a lot of big noise has been made because of their lack of true talent in the receiver room. Maybe you're not committed to Cole Kmet yet as far as how good of a player he's going to be. But I think the running back situation is going to be more important to him figuring it out, and that's why I have Khalil Herbert as a name to watch. It's going to be dual back season for Herbert and Montgomery. You can't move past it at this point. You have to worry about Montgomery's health, and Khalil Herbert last year performed really, really well whenever you asked him to take on a bigger workload. In the games where he got 15 plus carries, there was 4 of them. He had 3 games of over 4 yards per carry, which I'll take it. You know, every running back's going to have a bad game, but if you're hitting 75% of over 4 yards per carry, usually you're doing enough to remain getting those snaps. He brings a really good frame, a really strong frame to the game that should help Chicago, especially in those short distances. And he's got good vision as a runner, which you always love to see. He can find the hole and burst through it with relative ease. And as Chicago, again, they try to bring Fields along. You've got to make sure that he's comfortable. You've got to make sure that the offense, or the defense rather, isn't solely focused on ruining his day. You've got to make sure your running backs are doing their job. And I think Khalil Herbert is just as valuable to this offense as Byron Pringle or Cole Kmet, or because you've got to have somebody to take that pressure off of him, make sure the defense has to worry about the run. And that's what Khalil Herbert should be able to provide for Chicago moving forward. Now, I don't know that I want to put him at running back 1. I do still think that his numbers will be slightly down strictly because he will be in a committee, and I do think David Montgomery gets a pretty large share of the runs. But Khalil Herbert being involved here is more than enough to help provide that 1-2 punch that you always have to worry about. We stay with running backs for the next one because the Detroit Lions running back DeAndre Swift, he's been a candidate to break out for 2 years now, going on to his 3rd. And I think this is the year that he finally gets over 1,000 yards. We've seen him deal with missing a few games here and there. He missed 4 to end the season last year, so which is why I think he didn't eclipse 1,000 yards as a running back. But the big issue here is that their offense really wasn't suited to be anything that produced a lot of stats and numbers, and the additions of DJ Chark and Jamison Williams are really going to help that narrative because now Jared Goff has guys to target. You have to worry about the passing game a little bit more. Last year, really all you had to worry about was Hockenson and Amon-Ra St. Brown, but now you've got 3 receivers to potentially keep your eyes on once Jamison Williams back on the field, and now DeAndre Swift, who has usually been a very strong receiver out of the backfield, will get to focus a little bit more on just being a running back and using those skills to more flip the tables than to be a consistent every drive type of thing. With the lack of danger outside of Amon-Ra last year, the defense had to worry a whole lot about like they had to be on the field a whole lot, as simple as that, and it could key into the run game a lot easier on the opposite side of it because you weren't having to worry about the receivers and what was coming at you. Now you don't get that. And again, 4 games near the end of his season hurt his total. I do think he probably gets about 1,200 yards on the ground this year, which would be very, very good for him. And would really set the tempo for what we've expected DeAndre Swift to finally get to. Because, I mean, coming out of college as a Georgia Bulldog, we expected him to be a really prominent running back for Detroit and be one of the focal points of their offense. I still think that can be true. I just think you need a little bit more around him to fully get that juice. So that marks for 2 running backs already in the NFC North, but we're going to depart now. We're staying in the skill position grouping, but we moved to Green Bay, and I tried to stay away from rookies on this list, but mostly just because you don't really have a sample size of their performance in the NFL. But Christian Watson is too appealing here for me to say no to. Simply put, the kid is an athletic marvel. It's hard to find anybody more impressive than him, and now he's got a clear-cut path to being wide receiver 1 as early as in his first season. Tay Adams, he's gone. So now what are you looking at? You've got Robert Tonyan, you've got Alan Lazard, and that's the end of the list, unless you want to count the running backs. Christian Watson became a bit of a workout warrior, or was given a workout warrior mantra because of how well he tested athletically. But when you watch the tape, it's not just all smoke and mirrors. You can see that athleticism, and you don't need him to run a 40 to figure it out if you're watching that tape. It just helps get more eyes on him. Now, I'm really tentative to say that he will be wide receiver 1 this year. I do think Allen Lazard probably handles it this season, and then next year Christian Watson takes it over. But I'm still going to predict around 800 yards for him just because I know I had a first-round grade on him. People were kind of questioning Green Bay's selection there. I personally thought he was wide receiver 4 in this draft class. We can go into that in some other video, but I really enjoyed Christian Watson's tape, even if it was at a lower level. And I think Aaron Rodgers getting a athlete and a receiver like Christian Watson is really going to help. I think it'd be similar to what Marquez Valdes-Scantling could have been if he would have had a little bit more time at wide receiver 1 and would have been given more of a larger share of the offense. So that brings us down to our final one. We stay with receiver. The Minnesota Vikings, not the first team I think of to say that they need receiving help, but it could be on the horizon, which is why I think Smith-Marsette steps up and gets prepared to take Adam Thielen's role. Odds are Minnesota has to move away from Thielen relatively soon. He's getting older. You're seeing Justin Jefferson really become the star there, similar to what Stephon Diggs was with Thielen. And I think Smith-Marsette could be the guy to take that role. So long as his injury doesn't sideline him for too long, I do think he becomes wide receiver 3 for Minnesota this year, which would be a big step because we didn't see him get used a whole lot. And the real reason I'm saying this, for one, I really liked him coming out of Iowa. I think he was underutilized, and I would love to see him get more opportunities to thrive. I don't know why it has been to that point, because, I guess I get it in the NFL because he was a 5th-round draft pick, but in Iowa it didn't make any sense to me because you could tell just how good of a player he was. He just didn't get the designs to let him show off those skills as much. And you can see it a lot in his last game of the season in Minnesota last season. He had 3 catches for over 100 yards, and it just shows how impactful he can be, both with his yak abilities and just his frame is pretty solid. You like the way he moves. He can run routes decent. There's a lot to like. I don't think he'll ever be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, but could he be kind of the Robin to Justin Jefferson's Batman moving forward? I'm here to believe so, and I haven't seen anything really that indicates otherwise to me, so long as this injury, again, doesn't hamper him too much or delay him too much to where you're having to deal with that for too long, because then you do have to worry about maybe they draft somebody new because his availability wasn't there. But I do have faith that he'll get back on the field and he'll become a key contributor for Minnesota. So those are the first 8 prospects I'll be talking about. We'll hit all 32 teams. It'll be a 4-episode series again, and they'll be coming out over this next week. And I believe the final episode of this will be the first episode of next week. So if you have any predictions as to who I'm going to pick for each team, feel free to leave them in the comments below or send them to my Twitter in the description if you're listening on Spotify. But for now, that is all I've got for you. This is episode 5 now of the From My Perspective podcast, and I'll see you next time.